If you've been wanting to learn Figma, then this 3-hour compilation is going to cover everything you need to get started. I'm Maddy, a freelance designer from the US, and I'm going to be taking you through this crash course in the industry standard for designing websites and digital products. After becoming familiar with Figma's interface, we'll be diving deeper into topics like variables, auto layout, multi-editing, scrolling, animations, interactions, and plugins before designing a fully responsive website. Feel free to skip around using the chapter markers in the timeline or in the description box below, and let's get started. If you've been wanting to dive into Figma, then you've come to the right place. Today, we're going to be creating this cool web page, and along the way, you're going to get a crash course in using some of Figma's best tools like a professional. First, over here, we have the colors that we're going to be using. We have some logos and symbols for the brand that we're designing for, some images, and these were all created using Midjourney, but you'll have access to these if you want to use these exact ones. You'll see this wireframe, very messy wireframe that we put together for this site. So we'll be following it for the most part. It's just to give us an idea of what of this information is going to go where. So over here, we've also got some icons that we'll be using, some fonts that we're going to be using. So we're going to be using Inter and Roboto Mono. So these are kind of the starting point for our fonts. And then we have our page copy. So we're just going to be pulling from this for all of the text we're going to be using in the site. And I also want to point out that I actually changed the canvas color to make it darker. So you can do that just by clicking anywhere on the canvas, and you can come up here and switch the color of the page. So by default, it kind of looks like this, but I kind of like designing in dark mode, I guess you could say. So I just made it a little bit darker. Yeah, that's that. I guess before we dive in, I do want to show you around Figma a little bit. So this over here is the layers panel. So when we're selected on layers here, just like any other design tool, you're going to see your layers one on top of the other. The ones, on the top are on top of the ones on the bottom. So for example, if we come up here, we can tell that this gray is actually behind the white because it's below it in the layers panel. And there are certain shortcuts for sort of moving things around on the layers panel. So for one, you can hold down Command and hit right bracket, and that will bring it up one level. You can just do right bracket to bring it to the very, very front. You can see that brought it to the very top. So yes, this is the layers panel. Over here, when you click on assets, this is where all of our components and styles are gonna live, and we'll get there in 1 second. And you can have multiple pages in Figma. So here you can navigate to whatever page you're on. So it might be nice to have, kind of like your exploration page here, and then maybe your wireframes here and your designs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that. Above that here, we have our toolbar. So I won't, point out every single tool, but it does show you what some of the shortcuts are for the tools. I almost never come up here because I use the shortcuts. To do a new frame, you hit F. To do a new rectangle, you hit R. And to do a line of text or a text box, you hit T. And those are the most kind of important quick shortcuts for the things right here. Okay, so then in the middle is your canvas. Of course, this is where our design is actually going to live. And then if we click on any design element, this is where our properties panel over here on the right comes in. So I can click on images and see all the properties associated with images. Text, we have properties associated with text, things like that. And of course, we're going to get much deeper into that. This properties panel is where a lot of the magic happens. Okay, so now let's set up a frame for this design. So I'm just going to hit F on my keyboard. And as you can see, when we did that, these frame sort of like templates came up. So we can just create a frame of any size, but I'm going to undo that, and we can also hit F and look for what we want. So I'm going to choose this desktop 1440. Doesn't really matter the height because we're just going to, keep adding our sections here. So this is going to be our main frame for our design. So I'm just going to call this home page. And as you can see on the layers panel, this is what a frame looks like on the layers panel. It has this kind of like hashtag as the symbol. Now, something that's really helpful, especially when it comes to designing for web, is using a grid. And so Figma makes that really easy. So I'm selected on my frame here, and I'm going to come over to Layout Grid and hit the plus button. And by default, it's going to give me exactly that, a grid. What I actually want is columns. So I'm just going to click there and change it to columns. But instead of 5, I actually want 12. I want a margin of 28. So here on each side, we've got 28 pixels so that these columns aren't like all the way to the edge. And then I want a gutter or a space between each column of 14 pixels. Okay. And so now this is just really going to help us place all of our elements on the page and have it feel really consistent and also be easier for a developer to build down the line. And the great thing is you can turn this off and on by hitting the I here to, kind of disable it so that you can be designing and then, okay, I want to see what it really looks like and turn it off. So we'll be doing that throughout this process. So before we start adding items, I want to talk quickly about libraries and sort of saved styles. We're not going to go too deep into it, but it is super helpful, for example, to save some colors into a local library or basically to this file so that we don't have to keep eyedropping a color. We don't have to keep pasting a hex code. We can just have our palette set up for us. So it's super easy to do that. So I'm just going to select on one of our colors, come over here, and I'm going to hover over these 4 dots where it says style. Click on that and then click on the plus button. And this is going to allow us to create a new style. So we'll just call this gray. And then I'm going to do that for this too. This is white and black. Perfect. So now you can see over here under local styles, we've got our color styles. So now I'm just going to hit R for rectangle. I'm going to just make this shape here. And if I come over here, hit those 4 dots, then I can choose from any of these colors and it just makes it super easy. Some more things that we might want to add to our styles panel are our type styles. So same thing, I'm just going to click on the style, click on the 4 dots, click create style, and we'll call this header. Do the same thing here. We'll call this header 2 and we'll call this one paragraph. Okay, now that doesn't mean we're limited to just these, but it is really nice to just have a starting point. And the last thing I'm going to do setup wise is come over to these icons. And if you don't know where to get icons, Google actually has a material design icon library that is super, super easy to use. You can download them as SVGs, which I find to be the best way to work with icons. So I highly recommend looking into that. It's completely free. But once we have our icons in Figma, it's a good idea to set ourselves up for success by framing them consistently. So what I'm going to do is click on this icon here. This is a group of rectangles here, as we can see in the layers panel. What I'm going to do is hit Control, click, come down and hit frame selection. So now this is in a frame. What I'm going to do is make this frame 16 pixels by 16 pixels and center my icon in there. So as you can see, we're just going to mess with it a little bit so that it centers perfectly. And then we'll call this hamburger. And then I'm going to do the same for these. So I'm going to hit frame selection, 16 by 16. Make sure that this is not going to scale on us. 16 by 16, center that, arrow. And one more time, we're going to select on this. And the shortcut to frame a selection is Option Command G. Select on this, make sure it's not going to scale. 16, 16. And we'll call this copyright. So this way, all of our icons are sitting in the same size frame, which is just going to make our life much easier and help keep things consistent rather than running around with completely different sized icons. Okay, so back to our web page. Let's start with our hero and navigation. So for this top hero section, I'm going to create a new frame. So I'm hitting F on my keyboard. And I am going to just stretch it all the way across. And I think like around 810 pixels high is a pretty good height for a hero. On most screen sizes, you'll be able to see a little bit below it, which encourages scrolling. So that's great. And one thing I want to point out is that using frames instead of rectangles is really important in Figma because rectangles don't have nearly as many properties and as much flexibility as frames. And you're going to see what I mean with auto layout and things like that as we get further into this. But I basically never use rectangles unless I'm creating like a vector icon or shape or something like that. To kind of design and lay things out, I always use frames. And as you can see, you can always have frames within frames, within frames, within frames, within frames. So it's just a really nice sort of way to organize things. And speaking of organization, I am going to come over here to the layers panel and name this frame hero. Okay, great. Now I'm going to turn off our columns for now. We don't really need them at the moment. And I'm going to select on this hero frame and I'm going to add a fill. But instead of adding just a color fill, I'm going to add an image fill. So I'm going to go in and choose an image. So we've got our hero image here that I've saved to my computer. Perfect. So now we've got this image fill here. And now we're just going to start bringing over all of the elements that we want inside this frame. So now I'm going to come over and just start adding these elements in. So I'm just going to copy and paste a copy of this. Another way that you can duplicate something really easily is by holding down Option and dragging out a copy like that. So that's what I normally do to save time. So we're going to be using this pretty big. It's the main brand logo. So we'll just throw it in somewhere for now. We're also going to need a headline. So I'm going to bring this on over. Same thing. I'm just duplicating it by holding down Option and dragging, creating the future of vision. Now, also, if you have a hard time selecting on an element on the canvas, so like, for example, by default, these elements are nesting inside of this hero frame, which is exactly what we want. But as a result, if I go and click on this just once and try to move it, it's not going to move. I'm not selected on it. I'm just selected on the entire hero frame. So you can double click or you can command click to sort of click into a group or a frame. To select on what you want to select on. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to command click on this and I'm going to go over to my text styles and hit header 1 because I think that's really what we want for this. Okay, I want this like above the head so it's not covering the glasses. We're going to put it just up against this fourth column. And then I'm going to have this logo take up exactly 2 columns. Here and make sure that our top edge is aligned. So to do that, let's say they're not aligned. I'm going to click on both of them, and to click on 2 things at once, you can hit shift. So I'm going to shift and click there. And then you can come on up here and do align top. And that will make sure that they're perfectly aligned. Okay, so we've aligned them, but I wanna make sure I'm using consistent spacing. So we have 52. I'm actually going to do 40 pixels on the top. That's perfect. And then we also have our navigation over here. So I'm going to drag out a copy of this. And I think I want to use our header 2 for this. I'm just going to double click on that edge bounding line to bring it in and hug the contents. And we've got 40 pixels of space on the top and bottom. That's good. But these are really squished together, which we don't want. That doesn't really make for optimum clickability. So I'm actually going to detach this style so that I can change it up a little bit. And I'm going to come here to paragraph spacing, and I'm going to increase that. So we don't need to do it that much. I would say, what does 12 look like? Yeah, 12 looks good. Then we'll get our smaller logo. This is gonna be like what you click on if you want to go, you know, back to home on our navigation. So I'm gonna align it to the very edge, 40 pixels on the top, and I'm gonna make it 40 pixels wide. So this is the start of our navigation. We also want to create a cart button though. So we don't want cart within here because it's more important. We wanna like really bring it out to the side. So to create a button, I'm gonna do it kind of off to the side first. I'm gonna hit F for frame. I wanna make sure that the height is at least 44 pixels. For optimum tappability and accessibility. I'm going to round the corners a bit. So to round corners, you can select on the frame, come up here to corner radius. Let's see, oh, 20 is a lot. Let's do like 4. I want to keep it kind of subtle. Then I'm gonna hit T on my keyboard for text, and we're gonna call it cart. Again, we can use our header 2 font, which is good. Then I'm going to drag out a copy of this. We want to know what's like how many things are in our cart. So we have this. I'm going to name the frame button, but this isn't looking very good, right? So this is where I'm going to introduce you to auto layout, which is honestly one of my best friends when it comes to designing in Figma. I use it so much. You don't have to use it for everything, but I'm going to show you how it works so that you can decide when you want to use it and not use it. So auto layout, I'm going to hit plus to like, you know, start working on auto layout. As you can see, that automatically hugged in all of that extra space and it's hugging our elements. In fact, it says hug on the top and sides. So we can really kind of tell it how to behave here. So right now we have 25 pixels of space in between these items. We have 19 pixels of horizontal padding, so on the left and right, and 15 pixels of vertical padding, so on the top and bottom. I'm cool with the 15. Let's make it 15 on the sides as well. And then I'm gonna say 20 in the middle should be good. In fact, that actually seems like a little too much. Should we do 10? Yeah, I think that's good. So now the beauty of this is, say it doesn't say cart. Let's say it says, I don't know, button. See how the button is growing with what I'm typing? That is just super, super helpful and it just saves so much time. So I really love that. So I'm going to drag this in. As I'm dragging it in, you can see that it is going inside of this hero frame. And then I'm going to drag it so that it is perfectly aligned to this column here. Oh, I didn't explain before how you can tell how far away something is. So I'm just holding Option. I have this button selected and I'm holding down Option and I'm like hovering over the edges to get these red numbers to show up so that I know how far away I am from certain things. So that's a helpful shortcut as well. Okay, and one more thing for the navigation, we want our hamburger icon. So I'm going to copy this icon and paste it over here. And I think I want it all the way against this edge. And that makes me think I might want this. I might want to ignore my columns for a second and just have these sort of live together. So I'm going to have these 40 pixels away from each other. Now, turning off those, I think that looks pretty good. So next, I want to just have like a paragraph down here. So I'm going to grab this paragraph here and paste it on in. And since it's a paragraph, we're going to use our paragraph style and we'll align it to this edge. and we'll have it take up 3 columns. I think that should be good. And since we have 40 pixels of space on the top, I'm gonna put 40 pixels of space on the bottom along this as well. I think that is going to be good. That's looking great. Now we're just going to add in some more of our icons. So to sort of round out this design, I want to have this kind of mirroring this and have something in each corner. So I'm going to grab the arrow here and we can have a button that just says scroll down. Make sure we're 40 here. And then I'm hitting T, scroll down. I think I like that in the paragraph. Here is our hero. I think it's looking really good. Now let's dive into the next section. So we're going to do kind of a little bit of an about section here. So first, what I want to do is hit F and create a frame for this section. And I'm going to give it a fill of our gray. Then let's go over and see what text we want in this about section. Now, of course, since we're on this light gray, we are not going to want to use our white text. We're going to want to use black. So I'm going to come over here, choose black. We're going to use this as a paragraph and this as our heading. So come in here, heading 1. And this looks pretty good, but it's competing with this one. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to detach this and we'll make it like 78, I think. Cool. So now let's turn back on our columns because without them, I don't know where to put anything. I'm going to align these here and I'm going to do a little bit more space on the top and bottom than I did on this image, just to give it a little bit more padding. So I'm using 100 pixels on the top here. And then let's choose this and we'll make this our paragraph. And I think I want this to take up 3 columns again. So we'll do that. And then I want it aligned to the bottom of this. So you can see as I'm moving it, I'm getting that red line that shows me it's aligned to the bottom. I also like to hold down shift when I'm moving things like the line height, the space between the letters. I think that's called letting or kerning. I kind of forget. Don't come at me. But yeah, there's a lot that you can do to manipulate text here. I already kind of have it how I want it, but there's just a lot you can do. So feel free to play around with that as well. Let's give ourselves kind of like a title here, or like a label, I guess you could say. We'll say it's header 2. I think that looks good. Just make sure we're aligned. Okay, easy enough. So we're probably gonna need more room here because we also want to have, if we look at our wireframe here, we want to have product images within this section as well. So in order to create like a product thumbnail, I want to make that a component. And a lot of times in design, this is called a card. So we're going to create a card component, and I'm going to show you kind of all about components. So we're going to hit F on our keyboard again. We're going to make a frame. I just made it a random size, but we want to make sure that our images here can fit within them. So let's see, this is 452 by 452. So we're going to make this 452. The height doesn't matter quite yet. So then I'm going to do another frame. So a frame within a frame. So this main frame is going to be called product card. And then this frame inside here is going to be our image. So I'm going to do what I did before. We want this to be a square. So 452. And I'm going to give it an image fill. And we're just going to choose from those images that we have. Okay, that's great. So then we have this part of the card, but we also need the name of the product. So we'll go over here and grab that from our copy section. And so here's what we have. It's called Intelligent Glasses So let's see how we want to lay this out. This text here, let's do it in black, and let's do it as our H2. And that looks good, but I don't want it like all black. I think I want this to sort of recede into the background a little bit. So I am going to give it an opacity, this whole text layer, I'm going to give an opacity of 50%. Then I'm going to copy this out and we'll do sync to XM. So that's what it's like actually called. So we want to do 100%. And I think we want to make this a little bit bigger. So instead of the 13, I'm going to do 18. Okay. And then I'm going to use this same style to do our price. So now we want to make sure that this is like laid out exactly how we want it. So first of all, we'll bring it over here for now. We don't necessarily need this like background white. So I'm going to get rid of it. So instead of changing the color, I'm just going to literally get rid of the fill. So it's zero fill. It's not an opacity fill. It's just no fill. Then I'm going to turn on auto layout. And that kind of hugged these together again. So what I want to do is frame these together because I want these to sort of stretch the whole component and have an automatic amount of space in between. So I'm going to do Command Option G to group. And instead of a fixed width, I'm going to do fill the container. And then I'm going to click on this whole product and we're going to, wow, what is happening? Yeah, okay. That's right, believe it or not, but we just need to change the settings. Okay, so we don't need this much space in between. In fact, we probably need like maybe 8 pixels. 12 might be good. Okay, so the reason this isn't working is because we need to turn on auto layout on this frame level as well. And then instead of having this gap, we're going to do auto. And by doing auto, it's going to do as much space as will separate the items so that they're pinned to each side when you have on fill container. Okay, so those are things like those auto layout are just things that take practice, but they really are helpful to learn. So now we have this, and I'm gonna actually bring it over here because I'm gonna make this into a component. And the reason that you would make something into a component is if you wanna use it throughout your project multiple times. So buttons, for example, are great things to make components. We only have one real button on our web page, so I didn't make that cart button a component, but you absolutely could if you were creating a whole website. Cards are great things to be components. You can get really granular with it and make tons of elements on your website a component. But this is a really good example. So the reason it's so helpful is because you can make changes on the main component level that trickle down to all of the instances of that component. But you can also make changes on the instance level that don't necessarily, it doesn't go both ways. So it just creates a lot of flexibility, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So to create a component from this, you can either go up to this kind of 4 diamond icon here and hit create component, or the shortcut is to do Option Command K on your keyboard. So now this is our main component, and you can tell something is a main component if this icon next to it is filled. These diamonds are filled. Let me show you what the instance of the component looks like. So if I just select on this and do Command C, Command V to paste it so that now I have 2. See how this over on the layers panel has an empty diamond, and this has like the component symbol, the 4 filled diamonds. That's how you can tell which is the main and which is the instance. And on the canvas, you can see here, this is what the main looks like, and the instance doesn't have a label. So something I like to do is keep my components either off to the side or on a separate page or even in an organized, separate file. But we won't get into that. But I like to have it off to the side so I'm not accidentally putting that main component on the canvas, because we only want instances on the canvas. We want to only come back and touch this if we want to make a change that is going to affect all of the instances. So for example, I think I want for these to have rounded corners, these images. So that is the case on all instances, I'm going to make that change over here on the main component level. So I'm going to click into this image frame. Yes. And so let's see what that looks like over here. As you can see, it sort of adapted to that change. Okay, great. So now let's turn back on our columns and we can position these. So it's actually pretty much in line with where I want it, but I want to have 100 pixels of space in between these. And then I want to duplicate this. So another way that we can find a component that we created is by going into assets, and all of our local components are going to be listed here. So I can just drag one of these out and there we go. So we're going to just align those up. I'm going to do one more. That looks pretty good. Now, what I want to do is change these names so that they're not exactly the same. So this is where it's important to understand that by changing this on the instance level, it's not going to affect any of the other components. So I'm going to go in and change all of that. And I can also change the image fill. I'm going to go in here and just switch up this image, and same with this. So it's looking good, but I feel like these are a little bit too close to each other. Like this is just kind of, I don't know. I don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is actually frame these together. So Option Command G, turn on auto layout and increase the spacing here. So I think 32 looks pretty good. And you probably noticed that this component here is cut off, which is of course what we want. But something that might be helpful to know is that you can also turn off clip content. So I'm turning it off on the whole level here. I'm also going to turn it off on this frame. So that way you can actually see all of these, which is super helpful. So yeah, you can play around with that too if that's helpful. But it's nice because it is also possible to turn it on like really any frame. So because I just framed those together, now look, I can actually clip this content just by like decreasing the size of the frame. So if I don't want it to go off the page at all, even like just the bounding box, I could bring it in like that. So that's something that might come up for you as well. So now we want to have some buttons here so that you can toggle left and right through these images. So I'm just going to hit F, create a frame. You're probably so bored of me creating frames. I'm going to make this white, give it those rounded corners so that it's nice and consistent. And then I am going to grab this same icon here and make it black. And I'm just going to tilt it. And let's say we actually want to make this arrow itself bigger. If I go like this, you can see that the bounding box increases, but the arrow itself does not. So to fix that, we're going to go in to this arrow. So I'm kind of like double clicking into the frame to find the arrow. And instead of center, we're going to change this to scale. And that's going to actually make the arrow increase in size as I increase the size of the frame. So I'm going to make this 32 by 32, and then just going to duplicate that out. And there we go. We've got our arrows. And now let's just align them nicely to the sides. We'll also make sure they're aligned with these components. Okay, awesome. Now we're on to the last section, which is the footer. So I'm going to hit F for frame, create us a nice frame for our footer, give it a fill. We're going to add that last image that we've got is looking pretty good. And then we'll add our text once again, just aligning it up as always with our columns. Okay, now I want to have a sort of like email opt-in here. So I'm going to show you how to create, I guess, a form. So I'm going to hit F and we're just going to create some sort of frame in here. I'm going to give it a fill and I'm going to show you actually how to create a glass effect for the background because I think that would be kind of cool. So what we're gonna do is lower the opacity. So let's say actually like 20, like kind of a lot. And then I'm going to go into effects, hit the plus button, change it from drop shadow to background blur, and then go in and you can increase this blur. So let's see. 16 looks pretty good. See how that's nice and blurry? We're going to give this that 4 pixel radius. And then how to make it look really kind of glassy is to give it a stroke that's white, but it's actually a gradient. So I'm going to switch this to gradient and then just like really subtly, I'm going to spread out this gradient here. Okay, that's pretty good. And then to make it even more subtle, I'm gonna change it to 50%. And you could make it even, let's see, 2 pixels wide. Yeah, that looks kind of glassy, I guess. Actually, I kind of like the 1 pixel better. Okay, cool. And so this is just sort of the frame for our form. Now we need to create the actual form. So what I'm going to do is give it a title. Header 2 is good for that. And then I'm going to just create another frame. We're going to give it a white background. Yeah, I think that should be good. Again, we're going to do 4 pixel corner radius. Then we need a label. So to label these, instead of 13, actually, I'm gonna make this, yeah, instead of 13, I'm gonna detach that and make it 11 so that it's a little smaller and maybe even just medium. It's always good to put placeholder text. So we'll say your name here and we can put that in our paragraph font. Okay, so that is how you create a field. And then I'll frame these together so that we can duplicate it and make another one. So then I'm gonna select this whole frame and turn on auto layout just so that we can kind of make the spacing consistent. So let's do 20 pixels of space between these. Let's give it a good 40 pixels on each side and 40 pixels on the top and bottom. I think that is looking really good. Now let's just make sure that we're aligning it to our columns. So we'll align it to this column here. Yeah, that should work. And then the last thing we're gonna do is add some social links. So I'm just gonna hit F for frame, create a box here. I'm not gonna give it a fill, but I am gonna give it a stroke only on the bottom. So I'm gonna just go into here and hit bottom only. We're gonna make this white. I'm gonna make it 2 pixels for now, at least just so we can see it. Okay, so this might look like a line, but as you can see, it's a frame. So then I'm gonna hit T and put some text in this frame. So Instagram, wow, that's huge. Not header 1, we want paragraph. Let's bring it off here so we can see what we're doing. We'll call this link, turn on auto layout, and then we'll have, let's see, I think 12 pixels or 10, no, actually 0 pixels on the left and right. And then I'm going to add in that arrow component or that arrow icon. So I'm just grabbing it from here. I'm going to select inside this frame, we're going to actually go in here and adjust it. And then let's see what happens as I drag this out. I want to change this to auto again so that there's an automatic amount of space in between these two. Then I want this to take up 3 columns. So we'll align it to these 3 columns. And this, we could definitely make this a component as well, since we're going to be using it on multiple times in our project. So I'll just come over there. We'll go into assets and we'll drag one right there. And then I'm just duplicating this. You can also, once you've dragged out a copy, you can then do Command D to duplicate with the same amount of spacing you just did. That is a really handy trick. Oops, I wanted this over here actually. I feel like this is too big. I'm gonna make this that 78 instead. Yeah, that's good. This way we can like align these. So we're gonna do Instagram, Twitter, email, and Medium. And then I feel like we need just a little sort of heading here for social links. And then with this whole footer, I think it'd be cool if it looked like it was sort of like coming up from the bottom. So I'm actually gonna take the whole frame and give it a corner radius, but I'm gonna do independent corners here so that I can just manipulate the top and bottom. So what if we did 20 and 20? There we go. That looks really nice, except we can see that behind here, we actually have some white coming through. So to change that, I'm just going to select on this whole frame and give it a background fill of this gray. So this way, when we come in, you actually can't see that little gap there. And I think that this just makes it look a lot more finished. So yeah, this is the final web page. First, what are variables? Variables in Figma store reusable values that can be applied to all kinds of design properties and prototyping actions. For example, you might have a button design with a specific color and text style. Instead of manually adjusting each of these properties every time you create a new button, you can use variables to store these values and update them consistently across your file. But you might be thinking, why would you use variables instead of styles? What's the difference? While styles are also great for maintaining consistency across designs, variables offer an extra layer of flexibility and organization. Styles work well for things like typography, colors, and components, but variables actually allow you to create dynamic relationships between elements. And you can use variables to manage things like spacing, layout, alignment, proportions, and even animations. And you can take color to a whole new level using variables too, being able to switch between modes like dark mode and light mode. When used well, variables allow you to create really robust design systems with consistent naming conventions that allow everyone working on the project to be aligned. Now let's look at an example of how to create and apply variables to a Figma project. For this video, we're going to stick with color as our variable. So how do you create a variable in the first place? So you can see here in this line, we have local variables. So I'm going to click on that, and there's a couple ways we can create variables. One is here, create variable. So we're going to create a color variable. We'll name this color orange, and we'll grab this orange color that I've been using in this design. Another way that we can create a variable is by selecting on a frame or any element and defining it that way. So I'm going to select on this whole frame and go into selection colors. Here we have this dark gray. I'm going to click on style plus variable, and we'll do gray. Create variable. So that's another way that we can do that. And now that's kind of a shortcut because now all of the gray elements in this page are now tagged as gray from our variable collection. So let's do that with the beige as well. Perfect. Now, since we haven't yet tagged orange, we can go into style and just choose orange. So now all of the colors used in this frame are tagged as one of the variables in our first collection. So I say first collection because this is just the first layer. So let's name this collection primitives. What that means is this is the lowest layer of variables. And now we're going to create a second collection that is actually going to reference these values from the first collection. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's go up here and choose Create Collection. We'll call this one Tokens, because this whole process of referencing other variables is called tokenization. It's actually something that's used really commonly in software, which is what makes this a really good way to create consistent design systems that can be used by engineers, designers, and everyone that you're working with. Okay, let's create our first variable inside our tokens collection. We're going to name it color. And now we're going to be using more semantic names that actually hint towards what this color should be used for. So we'll name this button. And then we're going to reference this orange color in our primitives collection. Let's create another one. Color, link. And same thing, we're going to go into libraries and tag the orange value from our primitive collection. I'm gonna go through and create a few more. Okay, so now you can see I have most all of the elements on this page defined into what primitive color it should be using. Now I just have to actually link these up. So for example, if I click on this logo here, it is using the color orange. But instead, I actually want it to be using one of our tokens. So I'm going to go into tokens and click on logo, since this is our logo. Same thing with this. I'm going to click here, and we want to change this to something in our more semantic, and we want to change this to heading. We'll change this to body, this to button, this to text button, and so on. Let me show you why this is so powerful. Let's say we want to change the color of this button, but we don't want it to affect the color of this link. If we were just using styles, we would have to create a whole new style, and that would break a lot of the styles that are linked across our website design. But because we're using variables, we can really easily make this switch. So inside our token collection, I'm going to go into button and change this to the gray that we're using. See how this didn't affect the link or the logo because it's its own token. Another cool thing I'll point out is that you can actually use this to create light mode and dark mode, or any other modes you might need. You can do this by pressing the plus button here to create a new variable mode. It will automatically copy over all of the same values from your first mode. So let's call this one light mode and this one dark mode. Then I can go in and choose different colors for dark mode. Then you can select the frame since it has variables with different modes applied to it. And across from layer here, click on this icon to change modes, where we can toggle from light to dark. Variables are hugely powerful, so I've just barely scratched the surface with everything that you can do with them. We focused on colors here, but you can also tokenize things like text, spacing, proportions, corner radius, animations, and more. I really encourage you to start taking advantage of variables in Figma, and hopefully this gave you a good introduction. If you're not using auto layout in Figma, you're missing out on a huge time saver. There's a reason why professional designers use auto layout. It keeps designs consistent, files clean, and saves a ton of time. If you have no idea what auto layout is, it basically mirrors what a CSS Flux box can do in code. It allows you to align and distribute objects within a frame, and define layout direction, padding, and the gaps between elements. This especially becomes crucial when you're designing something responsive or something that should grow and shrink as your screen size changes. The good news is auto layout is actually pretty simple and intuitive once you get your head wrapped around it. But there are a lot of properties involved, so before we jump into a real design, let's get the lay of the land with a really simple example using these shapes here. Okay, so I'm just going to illustrate how auto layout works using these simple shapes here so that you can get a really visual sort of lay of the land. So first, what we're going to do is actually frame these together. And there's a few ways that we can do that if you're not yet familiar with frames. One way is just by selecting all of these. And then what we can do is control click and then control click in the layers panel over here and do frame selection. And the shortcut for this is Option Command G. So here we have this frame, it's called frame 1, and we'll just name the frame shapes. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to undo all of that and we'll do it a different way. So let's say I have a frame already that I want to place these into. So I'm just going to hit F on my keyboard, or I can come up and click on the frame tool up here. And I'm going to create, maybe I want it to be square. So we'll name this square frame. And then we can just drag all of these in. So those are the main ways to do it. There's also a way to turn on auto layout without first creating a frame. The other thing when it comes to auto layout is it's really flexible because you can have auto layouts within auto layouts within auto layouts. And we'll get more into that in our practical example after this, but it might just be helpful to show you that you can actually create an auto layout without first creating a frame. So I'm just going to drag these in. And again, I have this square frame, but these elements within it are not yet framed. But if I just select all of them and go over to auto layout and click the plus button, then it's created a frame that is also an auto layout. And that really is just sort of skipping that extra step. So I'll come in here and we can name this shapes. So now we can really explore what auto layout has to offer. As you can see, since I already had my elements aligned vertically, they're automatically going to be aligned vertically. And we can edit the gap within those a few different ways. We can just hover over the gap and extend or sort of contract it here. We can also do the same thing over here. And we can also just put in a value. So maybe we want 20 pixels between each. So here we have the gap between these. So it's saying vertical gap because these items are already aligned vertically. But what happens if we hit horizontal layout? They're going to align horizontally. And what we can do is also kind of even them out so that instead of them anchoring to the top, we can have them anchor to the middle. And we can do that by hitting this center align button instead of the pin to top button here. So I think that looks nice. And of course, you can pin to any of these, and we'll get more into that later. Now we have these aligned horizontally. What if we want them to wrap? What if we actually want these shapes to be a lot bigger? So I'm just going to click in and make these shapes bigger. And so when they're bigger, you can't really see all of them within this square frame. So what if I want them to wrap? So I'm going to hit wrap over here, and then I'm going to take this frame and make it smaller so that they start to actually wrap and we can see them within this frame. So now this property changes a little bit too. Maybe we want to align to the top left or the center left. We can really kind of play around with that. And whenever you have these wrapping, that also gives you this extra gap to play with. So let's say we want 20 pixels between the items in each line, but we want each row to have a bigger space, maybe 40. So we can really just get super granular with that. As this is now, we have it set to fixed. And fixed is fine, but I want to show you some of the other ways that you can use auto layout. So I'm actually going to undo so that we go back to our smaller shapes. We'll zoom in a little bit here. And as you can see, since I went backwards, we went back to the default. By default, whenever you put something in an auto layout, it's going to automatically hug it from the vertical and horizontal. What hug means is it's actually going to hug the elements on all of the sides, and we can control sort of how tightly they're being hugged. So if we come in here to the horizontal padding, we can give ourselves, let's say 40 pixels of space on the left and right, and we'll give ourselves the same 40 pixels of space on the top and bottom. And it's actually easier to illustrate this if we give ourselves a background fill. So I'm just going to give ourselves a light gray fill here so you can really see what this frame looks like. So here's where hugging really comes in handy. Let's say I want to decrease the space between these to 10. As you can see, it made this whole frame smaller because it's still going to hug those contents no matter what those contents are. We see this come in handy as well with things like text, which I will show you in the next example. So that's hug. Now, what if we switched this to fixed width? If we switch it to fixed width, it's going to get rid of sort of those properties that we were doing before with the horizontal padding. So if we just bring these to the left, that might be an instance where we want to have them pinned to the left, but we also want to have this fixed. Fixed just gives us the flexibility to make this frame as long or short or tall or wide as we want without it depending on anything that's inside of it. Okay, so there's one more option here that has not come up yet because you actually have to turn on auto layout on the frame outside of this auto layout in order for you to be able to see this option. So I'm going to click on square frame and I'm going to hit plus next to auto layout. So again, by default, it's going to make this square frame hug the contents inside of it. So it gave us a 153 pixel padding on the top and bottom and 24 pixels of padding on the left and right. But I just want this to be fixed. I just want this to be, let's say, 1,000 by 1,000 for our square. And then what I want is for this to actually fill the container. So I'm going to switch it to fill container. And as you can see, it's not quite filling it because we've got that border. So we can do 0 here and it's really going to fill it all the way up. So fill is super helpful because it allows for this frame to be dependent on its parent frame. And again, you'll see some more practical scenarios for this in the next example. But before that, I want to show you a couple of things that are just a bit more advanced, I guess. So what I'm going to do is select on our shapes frame in here, and I'm going to go over to the 3 dots, and we can see what we've got going on. So we have strokes, stacking, and aligning text baseline. We won't worry about that because we're not using text now. But what I'm going to do is actually give all of these shapes a stroke so that you can really see how this works. So then we'll go back in and by default, it's going to exclude the strokes from the sort of equation here. So what that means is if we have these strokes on the outside of these shapes, those extra pixels on the outside aren't going to affect the auto layout here. So let's arrange this so you can really see it. I'm going to do hug contents and we're going to make it kind of tight. We're going to do 10 and 10. So that exclude stroke means that if we hover over this, those 10 pixels that I put on all of the sides are not going to count the border. As you can see, when I hover over, that shaded area covers up that border because it's not including it in those 10 pixels. But by contrast, if we click on this frame again, go back into our stroke properties and do include in layout, it is actually going to increase that spacing because now if we hover over, these 10 pixels are not overlapping with that stroke. So that is stroke. And now we're going to do stacking. So if I push these together and have a gap in the negatives, that is going to make them stack. So I'm going to give this a gap of, -30, which means that they're going to overlap by 30 pixels. And so if we have that and we go into these 3 dots and do canvas stacking, right now we have last on top. You can change it to first on top. So you see now that the star is on the top instead of the hexagon being on top. Okay, I think that pretty much covers the basics. So now let's dive into this more practical demo. And what we're going to do is recreate this table using auto layout. And it might look complicated, but I promise once you get the hang of it, it's really simple and you'll be able to use these auto layout techniques with literally any layout. It's super, super helpful. Okay, so let's start with each line. Before we can even get to this whole table, we need to create the individual rows. So I have over here what content needs to be in these rows. So what I'm going to do is come over and hit auto layout on with all of that content selected. I'm going to call this row, and we're going to change this from vertical to horizontal. As you can see, we're already kind of getting there. Now I'm going to give ourselves a white background so that we can really see how this frame is coming together. And I'm going to also align these to the left, but also pinned so that they are center aligned, if that makes sense. So if that's not clear, at the moment, they are aligned left, but they're also aligned to the top. Right now, I want to align them so that a line could cut through the center of all of the items. That's what this is going to do. We still want it pinned left, but we want them center aligned with each other. Okay, so that's looking good so far, but we definitely need some padding on this. Let's give it 24 pixels of padding on the right and left. Let's see what 8 looks like on the top and bottom. Close. I think maybe 12 would be better. Okay, that's looking good, but they're all really squished together, as you can see, and we don't want that. So let's give ourselves, instead of 20 pixels in between each of these, a 20 pixel gap, let's give ourselves more like 40. See what that looks like. Okay, 40 is fine, but we could definitely use more. Let's actually do 80. 80 is looking good. And then what I'm going to do is actually get a little bit more granular with the padding. I'm going to go into individual padding, and I'm going to add more to just the right side, because as you can see, we want like more space here. We don't necessarily want this to be at the very edge. So instead of 24, I'm going to add 80 here. Okay. And that's looking pretty good. So now we want to make sure that as we change the content in this row, it's going to behave how we want it to behave. So what I'm going to do is actually make this a component. So in order to do that, I can go up to this icon, create component, or do Option Command K. So I'm going to do the shortcut. I'm going to click on this and do Option Command K. And this is our main component. So I'm just going to keep it up here and duplicate one down here and change it, see what we think. So here's our first one. And then let's say we have one just below it. And I'm going to change the information and let's see how it looks. As you can see, this is not behaving exactly how we want it to. In this table, all of the names are perfectly aligned on the left. All of the companies are perfectly aligned. All of these numbers are perfectly aligned, and so on. And that is not how this is behaving here. And there's a really easy fix to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this in our main component so that the changes trickle down to our instances. And we're actually going to frame each of these individually. So we'll start here with the checkbox, and I'm just going to do Option Command G. We'll call this frame. Double click into here, Option Command G, name frame, company frame, amount frame, pill frame, and date frame. So now I'm going to select them individually and turn on auto layout. So we'll turn it on for that, turn it on for this. And now I'm going to select all of those auto layouts, and instead of hugging, I'm going to do fill container. And as you can see, that already really helped what these are looking like. They're much more aligned now. And so now we just have to make sure that the space in between these is making more sense. You can see there's a lot more space here and, so on. So what we can do is instead of filling the container for this one, we can actually hug it, because this, since it's an icon, is always going to be the same size. Let's decrease this to 40 to really sort of see what we're working with here. We can align this one to the left. We can actually get rid of this padding over here. So we can make it 24 like it was before. And it's just feeling a lot more evenly distributed and aligned. I think we're pretty good with this here. I'm just going to duplicate and create a bunch of these fields just so we can have them, and then we'll work on this top section. Okay, this is looking good. I did notice one thing that I want to show you how to tweak. So at the moment, it seems like some of these longer names are coming a bit too close to these companies. So we can really easily fix that. If one field is going to always be a bit longer than others, then it's okay. Then it might be helpful to switch this from fill to fixed and actually extend it a little bit. So let's see how much it makes sense to extend. I think 160 would probably be good. And so then just from here, the rest of these are just going to fill the remainder of the space. So that effect kind of trickled down and these still all align really nicely. So that looks really good. Now that we have all of these, we're going to put them in an auto layout as well. So let's just do that. Let's just do that by selecting all of them and hitting this plus button over here. And we could call this rows. Okay, so it's automatically going to hug these. And I just had 9 pixels of space in between these, but we really just need like 1 because I just want to be able to see like one little line sort of in between them there, like this example shows. That looks good. And now what I also want is to have this section up here. So I'm just going to duplicate that. And as you can see, because we have this in an auto layout, when I duplicate, it really just sort of stays in the same format and just makes it really seamless, which I love. What we're going to do is just make this top row look like this top row here. So we're going to just put name, company, deal. We can actually disconnect this from its component by doing detach instance. And that way we can actually get rid of this and put text in it. So pipeline, well, we'll just call it status to keep it simple, and date. That is looking good, but we want to give this a different background color. So I'm just going to eyedropper that. Okay, perfect. And then the only other thing is we might want to make this, instead of regular, we'll make it medium so it feels more like sort of headings. Okay, this is looking great. The only last thing that I want to do for this is to give it a bit of a border so that when we put it in a frame, so that when we put it like on a white background like this, we want to have it stand out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is give this whole frame a background of the light gray. And what that's going to do is allow for those gaps to really show through. So you can see the darker I'm making the background, the darker those lines get. Those are just the gaps that are showing through, but we can sort of use that to our advantage. So I'm just going to do it about here, should be good. And then I also want to give this whole thing a stroke. So I'm just going to do the plus button there and then change it to outside, and we'll change it to match that color there. Perfect. And then just to match this, we can also give this whole frame or this whole auto layout a bit of a corner radius. So let's just see what 8 looks like. Yeah, 8 looks really nice. Awesome. And just like that, we've used auto layout to really quickly create this table. Now let's say we wanted to make this responsive. So this is seeming like a really good size for this iPad Pro, the 12.9 inch one. So this is really nice. We have like 65 pixels on each side. So that's good. But then what if we wanted it to look really good on like a big screen? So what if someone, increased their browser and they were on a much bigger screen, like let's say this MacBook Pro 16 inch. Let's just duplicate this on over here. This is what happens if we extend it. So that's not exactly what we want, but the fix is super, super easy. So what I'm going to do is go in and select on each of our rows individually. And once I do that, I'm just going to switch it from fixed to fill container. And as you can see now, this is completely responsive to how wide we want our screen to be, how wide we want our table to be. So that is super, super helpful. Auto layout is so helpful in making things responsive and also just in saving time. Next up, we're covering multi-editing, which is a really great time-saving feature in Figma. But since you've already been here for over an hour, you're probably someone who's really serious about learning Figma. And if that's the case, feel free to look into my course, Figma for Web Designers, where I not only cover the high-level principles of designing in Figma, but you also get the opportunity to complete assignments and receive expert, personalized feedback from the mentors here at Flux Academy. There's a link in the description for the course, so feel free to check that out and see if it's right for you. Multi-edit is a huge time saver, especially when you're in the exploration and iteration phase where you have a lot of just slightly different variations of your designs, and maybe you want to make a change across all of them, but you don't have components set up yet. It also is really helpful for staying organized and renaming your layers. Today, we're going to go over how to select matching layers, how to apply different transformations to layers across multiple frames, and how multi-edit affects things like components and variants to save us tons of time and help us stay organized. Let's dive into it. So first, let's talk about how to select matching layers in the first place. So let's just use as an example these pills. So we have these across multiple pages here. So I'm going to go in and just click on this blush one. You can see there's an icon at the top left here that says, if you hover over it, it says select matching layers. So let's click on that and see what happened. Okay, that's great. It just selected on all of the, like blush colored ones. So what happens if we go in and select all of these and then click this button? Now we've actually selected all of them. So if we wanted to make a change across all of the pills, then we could do that. A shortcut to this, so let's just select one of them. We'll do this camel colored one. A shortcut is to do Command Option A. So we can see now we have selected on all of these camel colored ones. That's how we select them. Now, how do we actually make these transformations? Now, once they're selected, we can make transformations, which I'll show you in a moment, but we can also do something cool. We can rename all of these layers at once. So to do that, I'm just clicking Command R, and this window will pop up. So we can rename this from color pill to, let's just call it color selector. And that will rename all of them. And of course, it would be better for this if we selected all of these, Option Command A, Command R, and changed all of these to color selector, not just the one color. So that's perfect and saves tons and tons of time, especially if you don't really get into the habit of naming your layers, which is true for a lot of us. I feel like naming your layers can be a waste of time sometimes, but then if you want to go back and name your layers to get more organized once a project is coming together, then that's a really easy way to do it. Okay, so now what if I am sort of riffing on this section here? So I have a bunch of different sort of layouts here for this about section, but what if I, on all of these layouts, maybe I even have 10, 20 different layouts here, just showing 3 as an example, but it would take a long time to, let's say, make this logo bigger on every single one by one. So this is a really good opportunity to use multi-edit. So I'm gonna go in here, I'm going to select on this. We can go up here and click select matching layers. I can also do my shortcut, Command Option A, and we've selected all of these here. So that's great. Now, something else cool is when you scale this, let's watch what happens. It's actually scaling on every single one, just like the first one. It's sort of just mirroring my action on this to all of them. So let's see, let's like really get in there, see what we want to do. I think something like that looks better, maybe a little smaller. I think something like that looks a lot better. So now you can see that without any hassle, we've just changed the size on all of these different frames. Now, what about something like color? So let's go in, I'm gonna do Command click so that I kind of click on this background frame here. We can see that we're using this off black color for it. Then I'm going to go up and select similar elements, and we're going to change this from the off black, maybe to the burnt orange. And so you can do transformations like that, tons of different ways to really save time across multiple frames. Another thing I want to show you is changing text. This is kind of life-changing, especially like if you've misspelled something multiple times and you want to go in and change it, or if you just want to change the text on a button. So I'm going to select on this button, find similar layers, and I'm going to hit T. And by hitting T, I can then go in and choose one of these. So let's see, chosen this one, and let's see what happens when we start typing. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to again command click so that I'm selecting on the text box inside of this button. And I'm going to select matching layers. And then here you can see that we've gotten this option to do multi-edit text. So if I click on that, or if I click T on my keyboard, then it's going to let us come in here. You can see that now these are sort of like dotted line outline telling us that those are going to be affected. So let's say instead of contact us, I want it to say learn more. Then it's changing on all of these, which is really awesome. While we're in here, we can also change the font size. So we can go in here and let's say instead of 14, I actually want to make this 18. I want to make it a lot bigger. There we go. We can change that across these different frames as well. So what if I want to paste an element into a nested frame on multiple frames? I think I want to put something like this sort of underline or divider line inside here underneath the logo. So I'm just going to hit Command C on my keyboard. I'm going to select this nested frame, go up and select matching layers. Then I'm going to do Command V, and we've just pasted it into all of these. And so then we can even click and drag it up. We can change it from fixed to just fill container. And that's happening on all of these artboards at the same time. And this works not just on frames, it also works on variants of a component, which is really cool. So I'm going to come on over here to these variants and I'm going to do multi-edit variants. So I'm going to come over to this thumbnail component here. And as you can see, I have a option here to do multi-edit variants. So I'm going to click on that. The shortcut for that is Q once you've selected on that component. And so now let's say I wanted to add an icon to all of these different variants. There's 6 of these. So it would take me 6 times as long to add it all 6 times. I just want to do it once. So I'm going to go into my assets panel. I'm going to find an icon and I'm just going to drag it right into here. And similar to the last example, we can then start moving it around and, changing anything we'd like about it. And it's going to transform uniformly across all of these different variants. The last thing I want to show you is how you can actually make something into a component using multi-edit. So we're going to go back down to here. Now, at the moment, this logo is not a component. So what if we wanted to make it a component? What if we're sort of like getting to that phase of our project where we know this is going to be the final logo and we know we want to have it across our project. I want to make it a component. So we could just make it a component and then copy an instance of it and paste it back into all of these. But a much easier way to do this where we don't have to like backtrack on work is to select matching layers. And then here we're going to create a component. And so when we did that, what it did was it pulled out the main component right here. It's hard to see when my background is so light. It automatically pulled out the main component outside of all of these frames and it made each of these an instance. So you can see it's an instance because it's got a purple outline. We'll go into the layers panel. You can see it's got a diamond here. That's an instance of a component. So you don't have to double back and copy a new instance and then paste it into all of these. It just did it for you. And so now, just like any other component, we could change the color of this and it's going to update across here, or we could just change it on the instance level and it's only going to change on that one instance. So that is super, super helpful. Really helps you stay organized and save tons of time. First, just as a little precursor, I want to show you really how scrolling works in Figma. And it has a lot to do with the height of your frame and what you tell it to do with the overflow content. So I'm going to show you what I mean with this simple example. We just have this sort of, flat frame here. None of these have their own scrolling properties or anything. We just have this design. And you might think, oh, this will scroll because it's obviously longer than the height of a normal web page. but that's not really the case. You actually have to give it a height and tell it what to do with the overflow content. So I'll show you what I mean. We're going to go and play this prototype. And if I go and do fit to screen, you can see there's no automatic scrolling that happens because this frame is actually this high. So what we're going to do is change the height of the frame. So I'm just going to kind of grab this and we'll make it, whatever, 800 some pixels just for the sake of this example. And so now I'm going to go into prototype mode, and by default, it's going to set your overflow scroll behavior to vertical. And that is what we want for this. So I'm going to go and show you how this is now different. So now this scrolls like you would normally want. So that's how the basics of scrolling work, but we can take these sort of properties and really go a long way with them. Okay, so now what if we want for all of this to remain fixed, but the products themselves to scroll through? So I'm just going to copy these over. I'll hit auto layout and align them vertically. We'll hug the contents horizontally. And we really don't need this much space between them. Let's just do 24 pixels of space. So we'll call this frame products. And then I want to nest it inside our main frame. So I'm just dragging it inside, and you can see it outlines in blue when we're about to drop it inside. So that's great. And now what we need to do is set this whole frame to no scrolling. So that's great. And now we're going to select on the nested frame. And instead of no scrolling, we're going to do vertical. And it's going to give us this exclamation point because it says, for scrolling to work, the content needs to be bigger than the frame. So that's what we learned in the last example. So we're just going to decrease the height of this frame. And in Figma, you can see more easily what you're actually doing if you hit clip content. So we want to see all of this so that we can make changes and things like that. But if you want to see what's actually going to be in frame and in view, you can always turn on clip content. And you can turn that on for specific frames too. You don't just have to do it on the main frame. We can do it just for this nested frame as well. That's just a tip to sort of be able to get the lay of the land and see what you're working with. All right, now let's see how this looks. So we'll do fit to screen. And then if I try to scroll over here, it doesn't scroll. This is just fixed. But here we can see that these elements are scrolling. So there's a couple little nitpicky things that I want to fix. I don't like how it scrolls over top of this nav. So we're just going to reorder our layers here. I also don't like that it just cuts off at the very bottom. I want to have like a little bit of space at the bottom. I think that'll just make it feel more finished. So what I'm going to do is go in, I'm going to select on this nav and just hit right bracket. And that on the layers panel is going to bring it all the way to the top. And then what I'm going to do to give us that little bit of padding on the bottom is I'm actually going to frame all of these cards together again inside the frame that already exists. So I'm going to do frame selection. We'll call this one grouping. Doesn't really matter. And for the grouping of these cards, I'm going to turn on auto layout, and I'm actually going to give it a bottom padding of, let's just say 60 pixels. So then let's see how that looks. Fit to screen. Okay, so start here. You can see now these layers are a little bit better. I like that. And you can see that it just looks more intentional to have this padding here. So I think that that's perfect. Okay, awesome. So now what if we want to do something similar, but we want these to scroll horizontally? So I'm just going to copy this frame over here. So we still have products with grouping inside, and inside grouping are these cards. So I'm just going to grab the grouping layer, and we're going to redo this so it's a horizontal layout instead. So that's looking good. And then I can reposition this frame here. And then if I go into the products frame, I can reposition the framing. We'll just again drag it right into our frame. See how much we want this to overlap. I think something like that could be good. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just decrease the width of our frame so that it matches up with the main frame. And if we do clip content, you can see exactly what's happening there. And then I'm going to go into grouping and I'm going to do the same exact thing. Instead of the bottom padding, we won't need that. I'm going to give us right side padding of 60 pixels. And then I'm going to take all of these and instead of scrolling vertically, we're going to want these to scroll horizontally. So now see how it looks. There we go. That looks really nice. Okay. Now, last thing, let's say we don't want to cover up the text here. Here, we'll grab this same vertical layout again. Let's say that we don't want these to go all the way to the top. Let's say we want them to stick about here. And we still want these products to scroll. We still want to be able to see all of them, but we want them to sort of stack on top of each other instead of, going off the page and covering this text. So once I get this in place, just going to, again, reposition this frame, sort of these constraints here. And what I'm going to do is instead of just giving this an overflow of vertical, I'm also going to go in and select the individual cards. So you can see I'm doing this on the canvas. You can also do this here in the layers panel. I'm just going to select the individual cards. And instead of scroll with parent, I'm going to change this to sticky. And this says stop at the top edge. That's exactly what we want there. So sticky, stop at top edge. Let's see how this looks. I'm scrolling around here. This does not scroll. This is fixed. But here, as I scroll, these stack on top of each other. Now we're running into a similar problem. This is all perfect except for this last one. Number 5 won't fully cover number 4, and it's because we don't have enough padding on the bottom. So it doesn't have anything else to scroll. So what we need to do is add more padding. And to figure out exactly how much, we basically just need to figure out how far the bottom of this card is from the bottom of the main frame. So I've selected on this card, I'm hitting Option, I'm just hovering over the bottom of this frame here. And we can see there's 246 pixels between. So that's how much padding we're going to need. So I'm going to click on grouping, the grouping frame, and I'm going to do 246, instead of just 60. So now let's see how that works. All right, start from here, scrolling, and there we go. That's perfect. Now they perfectly sort of overlap with each other, and that's exactly how we wanted it to behave. Line, card swipe, text slider, and headline. These are the 4 techniques that we're going to be learning in this tutorial. So the first one is going to look something like this. It's pretty cool. So you can do this technique with really any type of line or, something like that. So we're just going to learn a pretty simple version, and here is exactly how you do it. So I'm just going to grab my pen tool up here, and I'm just going to create the line that I want to animate first. So I'm going to just put it slightly off the page a little bit. I'm going to make it very squiggly. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, of course, you can always go in and clean things up. So I'm just going to make this feel a little bit more soft and natural. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to make this a little bit thicker. We'll do 5 pixels. All right, and now I'm just going to drag it off to the side here. And I'm actually going to make it a component. So Option Command K makes it a component. I'm going to name it line. And then I'm going to create a rectangle, and I'm going to drop it inside of this component. Okay, so now I'm going to make this rectangle the color that I actually want my line to be. So we're going to go over to fill, and I'm actually going to make it like a gradient. So let's see. Well, actually, I don't think we needed a gradient. We'll just do this purple color here. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure that this rectangle covers this whole sort of area here. And I'm going to select both of these layers, rectangle and the vector, and I'm going to do mask. So you can see that made our line purple, and that's really all we need for right now. Okay, now I am going to make a new variant of this. We're going to do plus button there. So we'll go state, start, state, end. Oops. Okay, and now what we need to do is for the start state, we need to bring bring just the rectangle layer all the way to the top. So I'm not pulling it outside of the frame, you can see. I'm making sure that it just goes outside of our line without going outside of this frame so that it stays a part of the component. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing here. I'm just going to command click so that I can click on that rectangle mask itself. I can also use my arrows. So I'm just going to arrow until it is just at the bottom here. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to go into prototype mode and I'm going to create a flow where we're going to go after delay. So after delay, it can be 0 seconds. Change state to end, smart animate, and we can do, let's try 3000 milliseconds. We'll see how that looks. Smart animate and ease out should be good. And then we're just gonna do the same thing here. Ease out. Oh, after delay, 1 millisecond. Okay. Now I'm going to go back into design mode and I'm going to copy and paste this right onto here. I'm going to make sure it's anchored at the top and we'll send it to the back with the left bracket. And now let's preview this and see what it looks like. There we go. Pretty cool. The only thing is it's going in front of here. So when I sent it to the back, that did not exactly work. There we go. Sending it all the way to the back. Let's make sure that worked now. There we go. That's pretty cool. And you could play around with the smart animate. You could do like ease in and out. You could make it like bounce and things like that. You could make it really slow or really fast. But that is how you do the line animation. Next, we're going to do a card swiping animation. So for this example, we're going to pretend that we designed an app where you answer a questionnaire and then this app recommends some books for you to read. And you can read them right there on your phone. So this is going to be that screen. So what I have is this sort of skeleton for it with a little heading and then your CTA. And I also have these cards that represent books. So it has a little image, title, author, a description, and then the sort of genre of the book. So what we want is for maybe this app came up with 4 recommendations for our user, and we want the user to be able to swipe through them. So what I'm going to do is first start with this first one here. I'm just going to position it in the middle of the screen to make things easier. And we can see I created this as like a selected state. I just gave it this purple border here. So this is the one that like you're currently on. So if you hit read this book, it would be that book, this, not the end of the world. But we want the user to know that there's some content behind there, right? So I'm going to put this in as well, left bracket to send it to the back. And then I'm going to just change the rotation a little bit. We'll move it sort of down here. And I also think it would be nice if the ones that weren't fully in focus were a little bit of a lower opacity. So I'm going to go over here and instead of 100, we'll do 50, or even it's a little too light. Let's do 70. And then I'm going to do -8 here. Okay, so here's one frame. Now we're going to have to prototype along 4 different frames. So what we're going to do is copy and paste these onto this next one, and then we'll make our changes, right? So we're going to get rid of this border here. I'm just going to hide it with that eye icon there. Now I'm going to make this one 70% opacity, and I'm going to send it to the back, and I'm going to turn it 8 pixels and kind of move it down here like this. And then we'll give this 0 rotation, bring it up to 100, center it perfectly, and then we'll turn on that stroke there. Okay, so that's looking good, but we also need another title behind it, right? So we're gonna grab this one, and we're gonna do roughly the same thing. We're gonna send it to the back, -8. See how that looks. Now I don't like how these are overlapping, so I'm gonna have to scooch these like that and like that. Scooch this one too. Okay, that's better. And then we'll make this again 70. That looks good. Then I'm gonna select all of these and paste them on here, and we're just gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do 8. We'll position it kind of like exactly where this one was. We can get rid of that one underneath it. Hide the border, 70% opacity. Bring this one front and center. 100% opacity with the border. And then we're going to need, oops, this guy, -8. Send it to the back. And -70% opacity. Okay, now we just need to do this one more time. Copy and paste 8. Have that overlap. Get rid of the one underneath. Give it that sort of unselected state. I could have made these a component and made my life easier, but for the sake of this example, I did not do that. So you can definitely do that and just have different states for these. That would be the smart thing to do. So now we'll hop into prototype mode, and we're going to put a drag transition on these. So we'll start with the first one. When you drag on here, we want it to go to this frame here. So let's call this flow card swiping. Okay, so we'll change this to on drag. We'll do smart animate, and ease out is probably good, but let's do 300 milliseconds. We'll have to see what that looks like. Okay, let's just preview that one to make sure that that timing is good. Okay, yeah, that should be good. Even like a tad bit faster might be good. Okay, cool. So then we're just going to do the same thing. So when we drag on this, drag smart animate 200 milliseconds. Also, if we drag the other way, we want to go back to the other side. So we need to do it both directions. So if we drag backwards, go that way. If we drag forwards, we'll go this way. And this one we can only drag backwards. Okay, let's see how this looks. Okay, so I'm gonna click and drag backwards and forwards. There you go. And there is the card swiping animation. You could also use this to create like a dating app and have the profiles kind of swipe back and forth like that. That could be another cool way to use this technique. Okay, this is the text animation that I'm going to show you how to do in this example. And like all of these, you can really get creative with them and really do any type of text or shape. You can do different sort of colors and layers and spacing with it, and it can come out completely differently. But I'm going to show you this example and you can kind of run with it. So what we're going to need to do first is take this layer and duplicate it and make all of the different colors that we want to use. So I have the colors that I like over here. So I'm just going to duplicate this, change this color. Okay, now that we have all of these, I want to name them so that I know which is which. So this is the order I want them in. So I'm going to do text 1, text 2, 3, 4, and 5. That way I know the order of them. Okay, then we'll reorder them in the layers panel here. And I'm going to stack them on top of each other. So right now they're just perfectly on top of each other in order, as we can see from the layers panel here. And we're also going to center this perfectly on our frame here. Okay, so before we go any further, I'm going to duplicate this because we're going to need 2 different frames to animate back and forth for this animation. So we'll call this one state 2 and we'll bring the slider almost all the way to the right side. This is how you can basically control this animation. Okay, so now I'm going to select on all of these except for the top layer because I just want to move them incrementally. So I'm going to move this one down 4 pixels, 1, 2, 3, 4, and to the left 4 pixels, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to deselect text layer number 2 and do the same thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Same with number 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now just number 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to do something similar, but with the rotation. So I'm going to go up here to the rotation and we're going to do -2. Now I'm going to do this incrementally. So I'm going to do number 1 is not going to have any rotation. Number 2 is going to have -2 rotation. Number 3 is going to have -4. Number 4 is going to have -6. I'm going 2, 4, 6, 8, and -8. Okay, perfect. Now I'm just going to move this just a little bit, 4 pixels to the right and 4 pixels up. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing on this side, but opposite. So I'm just selecting all of these. We'll do the rotation first. So instead of -2, we're going to do 2, 4, 6, 8. And now we're going to go up and to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Deselect the top layer. 4 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, perfect. So now we have these different sort of orientations of these layers, and now we can actually animate them. So we're going to do, since this is our slider, we're going to put the drag trigger right on there. And so we're going to say on drag, smart animate to state number 2. And let's try ease in and out and we'll see what that looks like. We'll have to play around. But then we're going to want to do the same thing over here. On drag, smart animate, ease in and out. Oh, let's make this like 800 milliseconds because I think we want you to really be able to like see this animation happen. Okay. There we go. How cool is that? So this one's kind of subtle. You could make one that literally takes up the whole screen. You could make the text actually grow as it, rotates and things like that. I think this is pretty cool though. Okay, now for this last one. This is what I want it to look like. I want for this to be one of those sort of landing pages where the headline changes words to really convey sort of what the website is all about and what the service is all about. So that is what we're going to do for this, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. So we have sort of our skeleton right here, and I decided that I want to have the word design actually switch from design to coding to copywriting to data analytics. And I also want to make it really stand out. So I put it in this sort of linear gradient, and that's just going to make that stand out and just look really nice on this purple background. What we have to do is separate these text boxes a little bit. So here's what I mean. We're going to have this on its own line. So I'm just going to cut that and paste it back in. And we also need to have for design and coding, copywriting, data analytics to be separated out. So I am going to double click on this so that we have a perfect bounding box here. I'm going to right align it so that when I get rid of design, the skills and fast don't actually move. So that's good for that. And now what I want to do is create a sort of frame that is only going to show this first word. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to frame this whole thing. So I'm going to do Option Command G to frame it. So we can see what the line height of these are and go based off of that. This is 104 pixels tall. So I'm going to make this frame 104 pixels tall. And we'll just kind of make sure that's centered within it. Okay, that should be good. And I'm going to right align this as well, because since it's on the very left of this line, we're going to want for the right edge to always line up perfectly with this skills word. Okay, so that's good. And then we can also, make this, we can scooch this over until it is perfectly aligned here. And then decrease that size there. Perfect. So now if I roll over this, I can see that this frame is the perfect height for one of these words and the perfect length for the longest word that we're going to have in here. So I'm going to call this switching words here. And then you can see if we do clip content, it's going to clip the rest of that content, but I do want to see it for now. So I'm going to make this a component, Option Command K, and we're going to make this variant a state, and this one is going to be called design. We're going to need to have, let's clip these actually before I make another one. Clip content. Okay, we'll call this one coding, this one copywriting, and this one data analytics. And then I'm just going to double click in here so that I am selected on this text box, and I am going to go up just enough so that it is perfectly lined up here with just the coding. Okay, so now we're going to take just one of these instances and I am going to line it up here with this. So in order for this to look most natural, once this turns from design to, let's say, data analytics, we want for this to center. So to do that, what we're going to need to do is first, we're going to need to make these only take up as much room as they truly need. So I'm going to pin these to the top right So once all of the text inside of these is pinned to the right, now I can actually decrease the size of this box here just so that it fits each word perfectly. Okay, it already fits data analytics perfectly. Okay, cool. So now when we bring in one of these layers here, just make sure it is perfectly lined up with this. Okay, and you can see we have a little bit of room for improvement here. So we need to move design down a little bit. Okay, perfect. Now these line up perfectly. And I'm going to group these together in an auto layout. So I'm just going to select both of them and do auto layout. And we're going to want these to center together here. And we'll want it to hug the contents. So that if we center this perfectly on the screen, then we can turn this into data analytics. And it is going to grow sort of from the center. Copywriting, coding, see how this really adapts and makes that whole line centered. That's exactly what we want. Okay, so let's change this back to design. And now I'm going to set up a smart animate on these so that we don't have to have multiple frames of this actual website. We can just set this up on the word level, I guess. So I'm going to go into prototype mode and I am going to add an arrow from design down to coding. We're going to do on delay or after delay. So after, let's try 1000 milliseconds, we're going to change it from design to coding and it's going to smart animate. And I think that can happen pretty quick, maybe 200 milliseconds and just ease out. That might be nice. Okay, let's just preview that and see what that looks like before we do the rest. Yeah, that looks good. I think we might want to do a bit more of a delay though. So I'm going to go in here and we'll do 1500 milliseconds. And now I'm just going to do the same exact thing here, 1500 and 200. After delay, 1500, oops, and 200. And then from data analytics, we'll go back up to design. After delay, 1500 and 200. Okay, now let's take a look. Awesome. I think that looks really good. I think it might look a little bit more natural if we switch up this order though. Like I don't like how it just goes from small to big and then back to small. So I'm just going to switch up this order a little bit. So we'll go from design to copywriting. From copywriting to coding, from coding to data analytics, and data analytics back to design. Okay, let's see if that looks better. There we go. I think that looks better. All right, and that is the last animation. Like the other ones, you can really put your own spin on this and use some different effects and all of that to use this technique for your own project. So these are the products that I want to have a little heart icon here, and I want to be able to click on it and have a cute little interaction of it like, vibrating a little bit or bouncing a bit. And then it will fill in a different color. So I have my heart icon here. And to do any type of interactions or transition design, you need multiple states of a different element. So for this one, we're going to have the before state. We're going to have like kind of a middle state. And for this state, it's going to be, the heart's going to be a bit bigger so that it grows and then shrinks. So it kind of looks like it bounces a bit. And then we're going to have the finished state or the filled state. So let's kind of see what these need to look like. This one, so let's design what these each need to look like. But first, so that we can use this multiple times throughout our designs, let's make these into a component. So I'm just going to select all of them, go up here to the components icon and create a component set. So now we have 3 of the same component. We need to name them differently so that we understand what's going on here. So the main component's called heart. This state should be called empty. This state should be called transition. And this state should be called filled. Okay, so let's select all of them and give them a layer fill. Okay, so let's select all of these shapes and give them a layer fill, maybe something like this bright pink. In the empty state, this layer fill should actually have a 0% opacity. So we still want it to be there because when we use Smart Animate, what Figma does is it looks at the different layers that are named the same across each element or each state, and it will sort of animate the difference. So if we want the opacity to gradually and naturally grow after we click it, we want to have that fill exist in the first state, if that makes sense. Even if you can't see it at all, it should be there. So that's why we've done that even in the empty state. In the transition state, maybe we should make this at 50% opacity, or maybe even 75 would be good so that it gets that color pretty quickly. Let's try 75 and we'll just keep experimenting here. But the other thing we want to do with the transition state is we want to make this heart a little bit bigger so that, like I said, it gives that illusion of it like bouncing or like growing a little bit and then kind of settling back in to the normal size. But this time it will be 100% filled with this pink color. Okay, so now that we have all of our states, let's animate them. So I'm going to go into prototype mode and we're just going to grab this plus icon and drag the arrow to the transition one. So on click, we want it to transition into the transition state using Smart Animate. So that's important. We want it to use Smart Animate. And I think easing in and out should be good. Maybe like 200 milliseconds. Again, we can kind of play around with this after we test it out. Okay, and then we want to create another one here, but we don't actually want this to happen on click. We want this to happen after a delay because we only want to click it twice, right? We want to click it, it grows a little bit, and then automatically kind of goes back to that, settles into this filled state. So after a delay of the least you can do is 1 millisecond, we want it to change to the filled state. And let's try ease in and out. Again, we can play around with it. And let's make it pretty quick, 100 milliseconds. Okay, and then we can get rid of this click one there. Okay, so now let's go back to design mode. And I'm going to copy this component and we're going to add it to our product image here. Okay, so before we add it to the rest, let's kind of see if we like how that looks. So I'm going to click on here on this whole artboard with all of our designs and click the play button. There we go. So that looks exactly how we wanted it to look. The heart grows a little bit and then shrinks back down, and the color change is a little bit more subtle. So you could play around and you could get really creative with how that looks. I like to keep things subtle so that they feel natural and like what we're used to with like normal interactions in the real world as well as on our digital devices. But that's a pretty good example of how to create something that feels like natural for the real world. If you were to tap on something, it would kind of move a little bit, right? And things would happen really sort of gradually and naturally. So that is our heart icon. And what we could do is take this and duplicate it onto all of the rest of these product images. And since we've made all of this prototyping happen on the component level, whenever we preview this prototype, you'll be able to interact with this in the same exact way anywhere that you have pasted that icon. Okay, Next, let's work on this toggle. So again, we want to make this into a component first. And that's just because we may want to use this other places in our designs. So it's just a good rule of thumb. So like I mentioned before, we always want to have at least 2 different states, right? So we're going to call this toggle and we're going to duplicate it. And this is what the toggle could look like when it's on, you know, like this bright pink color. But when it's off, we want to move the toggle to the other side. And maybe we want to have this be just sort of like a blah gray color to make it feel like it's off, right? Maybe we even want this fill to be like 75% so that it just feels like, I don't know, off per se. Okay, so we'll do exactly what we did before. We'll go up and create a component set and just name these. State on, state off. Okay, cool. We'll go into prototype mode and we will drag this arrow to the next one. So when you tap on this, the state should change. And instead of ease in and out, let's do bouncy because I just think this is kind of a fun, you know, use case to use bouncy on since it's sort of like this circle bouncing back and forth. And maybe we'll see what 800 milliseconds looks like. And then we also want to do it back to start, right? So same exact thing, but back to the on state. So then let's go back to design mode, copy this into our design and head back into our prototype and see what this looks like. Okay, pretty cool. See how bouncy that is? That might actually be too bouncy. You can kind of go in and play around with these. So let's see. Go into prototype mode. So instead of bouncy, what if we did a custom spring? So see how that like really, really kind of bounces. So let's see. Stiffness 6% or 600. Let's see if we did 400 instead. Yeah. And then damping, what if we did 8? Oh, that's too much. So maybe we do 40. That's not enough. So what was it when we started? Yeah, 12 is too much. 20. Okay, yeah, 20 kind of feels good. 600, that's better. Okay, so same thing. We want to do, yeah, custom spring. Let's do 600. And what did we do here? We did 20 and I can't remember what that was that we did before. 400. Okay, now let's test this out again. So again, we only had to make that change on the component level in order for it to, in order for us to see it on our instances. Okay. So it's good, but you see how it goes outside of the lines a little bit too much? That's what I don't like. So a fix for that might actually be to make this circle a bit smaller to just give it more room. So we made this 22 by 22 with 4 pixels on each side. 22 by 22. Okay, let's test this out. That's better because it kind of like hits the very edge and then bounces back to where it's supposed to be. So see how you really have to get into the nuances here. Like when you watch something, watch it with a lot of sort of like discernment and like a critical eye so that you can say, that doesn't feel right. Kind of evaluate in your head what needs to be different for it to feel more natural. And that sort of just goes along with design in general, right? You want to like put enough thought into it so that it feels like there has been no thought put into it, if that makes sense. So, okay, that's our toggle. Now let's do something a little bit different. Let's tackle this FAQ section And have you ever seen those sections where basically you tap on, like a question or something, and it will open a drawer of some sort with more information? That's exactly what we want to create here. So as you can see here, we have the two different states already kind of designed out, and they look alike this, right? So what I'm going to do is the same thing we've been doing. Create this into a component set. This way we can just keep using it and just change the text as we go. So we do want to have the same question here, though. That's important. Here we go. So this is going to be, well, let's name this correctly, accordion. Don't know if I spelled that right. And we'll do state closed and state open. Okay. So one thing that we definitely want, the obvious thing is that we want it to grow. So this is definitely, a step in the right direction there. But I think we want to make sure that we have auto animate on for this, because that is going to help us, kind of hug the contents here. So I'm just going to click on this frame and turn out auto layout. So we want to have a fixed width, but we want it to hug the contents. So that's good. Same here. We want to have a fixed width, hugging the contents. We want this to fill the container. These need to be framed in the same selection. And then here we go. Actually, in order to have these line up, I actually don't want to frame these together. So ungroup. And we want to frame these together. Frame selection. There we go. That's actually better. And then we want this to fill the container. This also. So this frame in general also needs to have auto layout on. Okay, so by playing around with auto layout a bunch, we've got it to where we could type anything in this field and this component would grow or shrink based on what we have. So let's say we got rid of this. You can see it is flexible, and that is all thanks to auto layout. And that can get a little bit tricky. I could do a whole video on auto layout, but basically that is what you need to do. You need to have each container hug the contents vertically and have a fixed width. Okay, so now that that's done, let's get into how this interaction is actually going to feel. So what I definitely want is for this icon to kind of twist as this drawer opens. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's take this and actually duplicate it here so that we're using the same thing. They have the same name because Smart Animate will actually, because when you're using Smart Animate, the frames in each individual element or state have to have the same name, or else, it can't really be smart and it can't really tell what you want it to do. So now what we're going to do is rotate this. So I just rotated it 90 degrees. And I am going to take this point here and drag it in, this point here and drag it in. And that way we've used the same element, but it's kind of twisted and it's going to turn into the minus sign instead of the plus sign, right? Okay, and we can see if we want to make it pink. I think making it black might help that fun transition stand out. Or feel more natural than for it to transition in terms of shape and color. That might be a little jarring on the eyes, but we can kind of figure that out. So now let's create that actual animation. So anytime this is clicked, we want to change the state to open using Smart Animate. Instead of this custom spring, we're just going to use ease in and out. I think that will be nice. 300 milliseconds should work. And then we want to do the same thing going back so that you can close it as well. And we could really center that action on these so that you have to tap on these icons. But in this case, I don't think we need to. I think tapping on the whole question should kind of bring it open. But anyway, let's see how this looks. So going to take this component and put an instance of it in this little FAQ section here. And let's just test this out before we add any more. Let's test out how this looks. Okay, that's pretty cool. So really look at this plus icon that turns into the minus icon. That's pretty cool. The only thing I'm noticing that's weird is the stroke. Do you see how does the stroke change? Or the radius? That's a bit strange. Let's see if we can fix that. Okay, so the radius here is 24, and here it's 24. But I think because this is longer, the radius just feels kind of different on each of these. So let's see, what can we do to kind of fix that? I think one thing that we could do is add a white stroke here. So stroke, we want it to be the same exact thing as this. So it's a 2-point stroke on the inside. So 2, but we do want it to be white so that you can't see it. Or I'm sorry, we want it to be the same color as this so that you can't see it. Okay, let's see if that helps at all. Yeah, no, that's still definitely pretty jarring. So instead of using a stroke here, let's get rid of the stroke on both of these. Let's see if that's any better. So now we have something happening with the opacity. So let's see, this is, I think we want to get rid of the opacity here. So instead, we just want to sample that color and use the sort of 100% value. Let's look at this again. Okay, that's a lot better, but I just don't love this color. So let's actually make it a bit brighter. I think something like that would work better. Okay. Yeah, that's so much better. Okay, I really like this. Okay, so now there's kind of a second part to making this work well, and that is this actual component in general. So let's go ahead and duplicate these questions here, and you can see they're inside of this frame. So let's turn on auto layout for this frame. We want to have just 20 pixels between them. We need to frame these separately from this so that we can give it some different spacing. So frame selection, auto layout, 20. And then with this, we want to have a good, let's say, 60 pixels of padding. That's too much. 40 pixels of padding on the top. I think we need a little bit more on the sides. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, and then maybe 24 in between the title and the start of these. Okay, so that's pretty good. And then what we want, instead of hug, we actually want a fixed height on this. So let's do 700. Okay, cool. And then because we've set up auto layout like this, let's see what happens when we click on these. See how it pushes these down? That's because of auto layout. So that is super key to making this interaction work. And it's all just auto layout and making sure that you're clipping the content on this frame here. And you have auto layout turned on so that there's always the same amount of space between these, no matter how big or small they are. These 5 free plugins will help you deliver higher quality work and therefore higher priced work faster. To start doing high caliber work, you first have to land a high caliber client. Pitch Deck Presentation Studio is a really cool Figma plugin that helps you create sleek presentations with animations that can be exported to PowerPoint, Keynote, Google Slides, as a PDF, and just as a web link. You can easily reorder your slides using these preferences here to make your frames from your Figma file into a really organized presentation. And you can even add animations, not just as transitions between slides, but actually on the layer level to make certain layers, text boxes, logos, etc. come in, animate in however you'd like. When you're working with high caliber clients, lorem ipsum is not gonna cut it. Quality web and app design projects feel real. Otherwise, viewers are completely taken out of the context of the project, and there's a huge block between the designs and the end result. But I get it, you weren't hired as the copywriter for your client. Relume Ipsum is a really cool plugin that replaces your sample text or fills in text boxes for you with text that makes sense in the context of your project. It uses AI and a short description that you type in to fill in text boxes perfectly. It even knows when a piece of text is a heading or body copy and will generate something that makes sense depending on which one it is. There's even advanced preferences here where you can give suggestions or make notes to tweak the copy that the AI generated. This saves so much time and really helps your designs feel real and make sense to your client. Clients hire you to be the expert on all things UI, and accessibility and ADA compliance is no exception. Stark is my favorite suite of accessibility tools that you can use directly in Figma with their plugin. I mostly use it for color contrast. This feature is free, and I use it for things like buttons and text colors over certain backgrounds to make sure that they're at least AA compliant for my clients. The paid version even gives you color suggestions, but there's easy ways to work around that. You can also see a vision simulator, which helps you see what your designs look like for folks with different types of color blindness. Some other cool paid features they have if you decide to upgrade have to do with accessibility for typography, alt text, touch targets, and more. Clients won't pay top dollar for subpar work. So make sure your Figma files are buttoned up, super tight, and have no mistakes when you hand them off. When I first started working in tech, the QA process was extensive, took days and sometimes even a dedicated team. But now there are tools available that do a lot of that work for you. Design Lint is a plugin that automates some of the QA process so that you can get your Figma file tightened up faster. It checks the consistency of text styles, color styles, fills, strokes, border radius, and effects, and points out ones that aren't consistent with your Figma file. You can select items and fix your mistakes in bulk with just one click. You can't be a designer for high-paying clients without the process to prove it. Quality projects are built with design tokens and components, both in Figma and then in React. Anima is a plugin that accelerates the design to development process and helps you maintain a tokenized design system. You can turn your designs into code in various different ways. You can build a web app by exporting your designs to React, publish a website by exporting as HTML and CSS. You can easily hand off to developers and even create live prototypes yourself. And if it seems overwhelming, they actually have a free source file tutorial that walks you through the whole process of all of this. Give these plugins a try and see how they can significantly up-level your workflow and allow you to work on more high caliber projects faster. This is the web page that we're going to be recreating. Here I have the styles that we're going to be using, all of the fonts, colors, copy, and even the imagery that we're going to be using for this site. We have everything we need and we can just focus on making this layout really, really nice and adding some awesome animations. I have my wireframe here to work off of, and let's get right into it. For the header of this, I want to use this image here. So I'm just going to drag it over, and let's see. That size should already be pretty good. Now we want to first make the navigation. So I'm just going to go over to our copy. This is the menu items we're going to need, and we're also going to need this logo. So I'm just going to copy that over as well. We'll just drag everything in. Now we need to use our text styles here. So let's just head over and look at what those look like. I think like body 1 would be pretty good for these. I'm just gonna copy that here, and then we can just double click here so that it shortens the bounding box for us. And we'll just stick this over here for now. So I'm gonna do something a little bit different for this. I'm going to make sure these are both the same color, and then let's align them. I'm going to frame them together with Option Command G. Center it, 40 pixels should be pretty good there. And then I actually want to give this whole layer a blending mode of difference. And that's just going to make this logo really stand out and also give this a little bit of like a gradient with the background. So I think that's pretty cool. Might also look nice if this is right aligned since it's along the right side of the page. And maybe we want to give it a little bit more room. So instead of 100 pixels, we'll do 120 of space there. And then we'll want to make sure we have auto layout on so that that change reflects in, you know, the spacing here. So this is going to be in the center of this perfectly. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So now we're going to need a heading. So let's go up. Exploring automotive history is going to be our heading here, but we're going to make it this font Clash Grotesque. We'll do regular, and this text style here is 160 and all caps. I'm going to make this one of our lighter colors so you can really see it. And I'm actually going to separate this out so that they're on different lines and can be sort of manipulated differently. So exploring automotive history. Now here's when I want to turn on our columns because I really want to position these in a way that kind of makes the most sense, which makes me think I think we need to bring these in a little bit. And since that's not behaving as expected, that means that we need to change this to auto. Perfect. Now there's just an automatic amount of space in between these items, so it actually takes into account the fixed width that we want. Okay, awesome. So now what I want to do, I'm going to position these just how I think they're going to look the best. I think that could be nice. And then we also are going to have a video here that's going to play. So this might sort of change our layout a bit, but we'll see. I want to round the corners on this. Maybe like 20 pixels would be good. Yeah, that's looking really good. And this leaves us a nice amount of space for our text. So I'm just going to go up and see. Here's the text that we want. And I think the text style we want to use for this is going to be the body 1. And we're going to do that same light gray color for this. Make it medium. Let's see what's going to look good. I feel like if we align it there, that would look nice. Now I'm just going to play around with this background photo a little bit. So I'm going to go into crop because I do want to keep it the same like width and height. But I kind of want the car to just be sort of almost driving into the frame. So something like that could be nice. Yeah, I think I like that better. That's good, but I also want some of this darkness to be behind this text so it's easier to read. So I think like, Yeah, that works. Then we're just going to go up here to one of our assets. This is just a play button, and we'll stick this right here so that it's clear that this is a video. Okay, now I want to create a section that's actually going to scroll horizontally. So I'm going to hit F on my keyboard for frame, and we're going to make this around like 880 pixels. I'm going to give it a background fill. We'll turn off our columns for now. And let's just bring this outside so we can really kind of see what we're dealing with here. And we'll give it the same background fill. Now let's look at the content that we're going to need in this section. So here's our content. And like I said, I want these to scroll horizontally. So I want to have like a heading, an image, and this description text. But I want this image to be kind of a unique shape. So let's just see kind of what we can do here. 32 pixel radius will be good. Okay, so I like this shape a lot. Now what we're going to do is head up here and do union selection. So that's just going to make these sort of the same. And then I'm also going to do flatten selection. And that's going to make it so that I can select on these points here and also give them a corner radius. So then it really feels like all one shape. Okay, now let's grab this image and we're going to use this shape as a mask. So I'm going to position it directly over top here, and I'm going to select both and head up to use as mask. Okay, that's looking good. Now, again, with the sort of crop, we can move this around to make sure we're getting all of the parts of the image that we want to include. I think that could look good. Okay, now let's group those together. Okay, perfect. Now we have a perfect amount of space for our heading and our description text. So I'm just going to grab this text. We'll make it this dark blue color from our color palette. We're going to do 1960. So for this, I think our text is going to be a little smaller. Let's do 128. Should be good because I want it to be like within this bounding box. So that's looking really good. And then let's make this all caps. We'll make it medium so it's easy to read, and 18. Then same thing, I want to, make it fit sort of perfectly within this box. Yeah, I think that looks really cool. So now I'm going to frame these together as well. And just so that we can name this, we'll name it year, because we're kind of going to go through a timeline of sorts. So now let's position this back within the site here. And what I want to do is turn back on our columns, because I think I want this to start, at that first column and take up these 9 columns. And then we'll have one column in between these, because we're going to want 3 of them. So now I'm actually going to turn on auto layout here. We need to give it 50 pixels on each side to make up for this little gap here. We'll call this years. We'll do 140 pixels between each one. And let's paste another one there. So bring it down here so you can see. And now I'm just going to change the content on here. So to switch the mask, it's super easy. I'm just going to click on this picture, do Command C, and then Command click inside of here so that I'm selecting on the image that it's masking, and then do Command V. So that just sort of pastes it on top of there. And then if you want to clean up your layers, you can go in and delete the one underneath. Okay, I like how this is looking. So now Like I said, we'll bring it back, and we have clip content turned on, which is why you can't see the rest of that frame, which is good. That's what we want. But we will come back when we go into prototype mode and do something special with this so that we can actually do that horizontal scroll. But for now, we'll leave it as is, and let's move on to the next section. So I'm gonna create another frame, position it just below that frame. And I'm actually going to frame all of this together as well. That way we have these individual sections, and that just makes life easier because then we can turn on auto layout here. So we'll call this one hero. We called this one years. And now this one is going to be milestones. Going to take this text style again. And we'll just create our heading. We'll position this in a second. Once we have everything on the page, we can turn back on. But for this section, what I want to do is kind of like a hover effect. So I'm going to have a list of different milestones here, like sort of from the auto industry. And whenever you hover over one of them, it should change an image on the left so that you can actually see an image of kind of what we're talking about here. Let's create the image first. So same thing, I'm just going to have a frame. We'll make it about, you know, the size that we want. Something like this would be good. And I want it to have those rounded edges. Just going to come in with this image here and paste it right inside. So I just cut and pasted it once I clicked on the frame. So I'll call this frame changing image. So just get it kind of how we want. I think something like that would be nice. Even a little bigger. Okay, perfect. We need to create the component that is going to be sort of the hover text that you're going to hover over to change this image. So like I've mentioned so many times before in previous videos, it's always better to start with a frame rather than like a rectangle or anything else. So I'm just going to hit F on my keyboard. We're going to create a frame, just an arbitrary size for now, but we'll call this hover list. Okay, so then put my text inside of it. We probably want this to be smaller, like, let's see, what do we have in our text styles over here? Yeah, actually this should be good. This 80. Okay. And so since this is just a component, I'm just going to call this list item, or I'm going to put the text inside as list item, and then we will, on the actual instance level, put in our real content. So I actually want this to go all the way on the sides. I'm going to turn on auto layout here, but I do want this to be a fixed width. So to figure out what we want our fixed width to be, I'm going to turn back on our columns, put this in here, and let's see, I think like sort of this half would be nice. And while we're at it, we can position these how we want them. Could probably even make this a bit longer like this. So that looks like a good width. So we're going to keep it fixed width, but we are going to hug it horizontal or vertically, I should say. And so we need to close this gap a little bit. I think like 32 pixels will be good. And then, like I said, I want this actually on the right. So I'm going to hit this left align button here and make sure that the text itself is left aligned as well. So that's good. Now what I want to do is give this it's kind of just like a border. And then what I want to do is give this a border. So I want it to be this peachy color. We'll do inside and maybe two. But I don't want it on the right and left. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to do, I'm just going to do top, custom. And I need to do top and bottom. So it's kind of hard to see on here. I'll show you what it looks like on here. If we turn these off. Okay. See, we don't need a background, but see what this is going to look like here. In fact, this text might be way too big. Instead of 80, let's do like 40. I think 32 actually. Yeah, that's better. And then once we have that, we can probably make this a bit smaller too, like, yeah, 24. I think that's a lot better. We can make this a component. So in order to do that, we can come up to this icon up here, create component. Perfect. And then it's kind of hard to see. So once we give it another property, it's going to give us the opportunity to add like a background to this. So that's what I'm going to do. We'll just go like that. Perfect. So now we have two different states of this. So we'll call this property state default and state hover. So what do we want this to look like when we are hovering over it? Well, instead of just having the border, I think I want this whole field to also have a background color. So we're going to go into fill and give it this background color. So easy. Now I also think I want to make this the medium just so it's easier to read, especially with this sort of background. Okay, so that looks good. In order to set up this sort of hover state, we need to go into prototype mode. And I do this on the component level versus the instance level, because then all of these components that we drag into our file, all of the instances are going to behave the same exact way. So we only have to do this once for it to work across the file. So I'm going to just click on this plus button here and drag it to this instance or to this state. And then on hover or while hovering, change state to hover. So that's easy. Go back into design mode. I'm going to go back and turn on our columns. And we're going to drag in an instance of this and we'll get it all set up exactly where we want it. Okay, perfect. And then I'm just going to duplicate this here. And then once I drag out a copy, I can do Command D to keep duplicating that. I want to group these together in an auto layout. So I'm going to go over here. So I'm just going to select all of these and hit the plus button for an auto layout. So we'll call these list group. I want to have -2 pixels of a gap between these. That way they overlap each other perfectly. So we don't have like an extra thickness in these middle strokes. So that is looking good. Now I just need to go and look at what all of these milestones actually are. So I'm just going to paste these in. Okay, so now we have half of this working. Let's actually test and make sure it is really working. So just go down here. And yeah, as you can see, when we hover over this, it does hover. The only thing I would say is it seems like kind of abrupt. So instead of instant, we can do like maybe smart animate and then ease in and out. Let's see if that helps at all. Yeah, see how that just feels like a little bit more subtle or a little more gradual? I like that. Okay, so that is half the battle. Now we also need to make it so that when we hover over each of these, this image actually changes. And that is a little bit more involved, but it's not too difficult. So I am just going to drag this out here. Let's make the background this light gray so we can really see it. And actually, before we even do that, I forgot to add the subheading that we need. So we'll just make some room for that. We can make this 18, can be pretty small. So for what we want to do here, we actually don't want to have a hover effect on these. So you can go ahead and get rid of that. And what we're going to do is actually make this entire frame a component. So I'm just going to do that. And then we can start to add some different variants here. So we're going to need 5 variants since we have 5 of these line items to hover over. So I'm just going to name it state. We'll call this one Ford, call this one Chevrolet, call this third one Lambo, Porsche, and Jaguar. And now we're going to just set what these states are going to look like. And then we'll actually introduce the hover state to kind of go back and forth in between these. So this is what the Ford one should look like, but we should actually have this at its hover state, you know, whenever you're on this current state. For this one, we want this one to be on hover, and we're going to do a different image here. For this, we want the Lamborghini to be hover. And again, change this image. Same here with the Porsche and the Jaguar. So now we can actually set some hover states between these. So we'll go into prototype mode. And we'll start here. So I'm going to select on this, and we can actually click on select matching layers. So that's going to select on all of the Chevrolet ones here, and that will just make life a little easier for us. So we can unselect this selected one though. So then we can do while hovering, change to state Chevrolet. So then now you can see all of these arrows are pointing to the same one. So we can do that same ease in and out thing. I think that will look nice. And now we just have to do that same exact thing for all of these. So I'm going to select all of them. I'm going to deselect the hover state one. And then I'm going to add an interaction, hovering, change to the Lamborghini. Perfect. And then I'll just do that for all of the rest. Okay, so now we've got all of these prototyping arrows, and we can see how this actually works. So I'm just going to drag a copy of this into our actual design. We can scooch these out of the way for now. Make sure this is right underneath here, and I'm just going to hit play. Scroll down here, and there we go. That looks really nice. Okay, now let's create another section where folks can sign up to a newsletter. So we're just going to hit F for frame, create this frame here. I think like 600 pixels high will be good for this. And to kind of break up just the plain background, I still want to keep it really simple, but I want to have kind of like a border almost for this. So I'm just going to create a rectangle and do 50 pixels from all sides. I'm going to give it a 32 pixel radius and get rid of the fill, but add a stroke. And we're going to do that same 2 pixel stroke in this sort of mauve color. I think that will look nice. And then we're definitely going to need a headline here, but we'll make this a little smaller, like 80. We'll center it, and we can say sign up to the newsletter. Perfect. Then let's see, what other copy do we need here? There's this copy. So we can make this 18. We'll do medium so it's easier to read. And then just position it around there. And then we also need a field where someone can actually sign up. So I'm going to frame this, turn on auto layout, give it some spacing on all sides, and then do something similar that we did before, where I'm going to give this a stroke, but just on the bottom. And we'll do that same mauve color in 2 pixels. Maybe for this, we don't need 24. Maybe just like 12 would be good. Yeah, that's looking good. But then we also want to have this arrow so that when someone puts in their email, they actually have somewhere to click. So I'm just going to put that in there. And let's see, I think I do like that blue color, but maybe we just make it a bit smaller. And then maybe we give it an auto. That way we can give it some more space in between there. And now I feel like it does need more space on the bottom. Like, yeah, that's better. So now let's turn on our grid or our columns. That way we can really see what layout is going to look best here. I almost feel like this needs to be bigger, like 24. Okay, so then can make this at least 3 columns. Let's see. I think 3 columns would work, but I kind of feel like, yeah, maybe it needs to be like lined up with this text here. I think that might look better. And then we'll just kind of center this in there. Okay, nice. So then we can turn those off, see what it's really looking like. I think that looks good. And then the only thing that we need now is a real footer. So for this, I'm actually going to change the whole background of this page to that dark blue. We'll change this background to that light gray. And this way we can have just the footer be this sort of background color. And I'm actually going to give this whole frame a 32 radius only on the bottom here. So then it kind of feels like all of these sections are layered over top of like this footer, which I think just looks really, really nice. Might be even easier to see if we boost this up a little bit, just for now. Okay, so then let's see what we need in our footer. We just need this information here. Okay, cool. So I need to make that the light gray so we can actually see it. And same with this. Make this our text styles. We'll do regular for this. And I think right aligned would be nice. Okay. I think this is too big. Let's just make it 18. Even this could probably just be the same size as these, which is also 18. Just make sure there's 50 pixels of space. I want to align this to the bottom here. Okay, awesome. All right, there we go. We are getting there. The last thing that we need to do for this desktop view is make this section here horizontal scrolling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this entire artboard. I'm going to go into prototype and we're going to set the scroll behavior. So we're going to say overflow vertical. And it's giving us this exclamation point because right now there's no overflow because we actually have the whole frame with the whole height instead of just having like a viewport like this. So let's do this as our viewport here. And now it's going to be able to scroll, but it's kind of hard to see that way. So I'm going to do unclip content. And then I'm going to go into just this section and go into prototype mode. And now we're going to do scroll with parent. We do want that because we want this whole section to scroll up when we scroll. But overflow should actually scroll, horizontally. And so then what we need to do is the same thing we did before. So now we have this set up perfectly. We can hit play and let's see what this looks like. I'm just going to scroll and then once I get here, I can scroll horizontally and then vertically. All of that is working great. And there we go. Perfect. So now the last thing we have to do is just make this responsive. So I'm just going to go through and place all of these same elements on this tablet size screen and just show you what I would change for this specific breakpoint. So I'm just going to grab this section here and duplicate it over, and we'll have to see kind of what we're working with here. So I'm just going to make this whole image smaller. I'm going to select on this frame here, and we'll make this smaller as well. And instead of having this full menu, I think we just need to have a menu button there. That way we can actually have a sort of separate menu like you would on mobile. So that itself is pretty good. This logo can probably be a little smaller on tablet. Yeah, that's nice. And then I'm just going to make these a bit smaller as well. So 96. And then turn on those grids so we can really see what we're working with. Bring back in this video here. We still want to keep this button 40 by 40 because of tappability. So that's good. And then just bring back in this guy here. Now, the last thing I want to do is move around this photo a little bit. So, like I said, I definitely want for this to be in front of the dark background, but I also want to make sure we're seeing this car. So I'm just going to scooch it over like that. I think that should be good. So now for this section, so I'm just going to take these individual guys here. And for this breakpoint, I'm going to stack them on top of each other. So we'll do auto layout and we'll do vertical here. And then we are probably going to have to make these guys a little bit smaller. So we'll start with this image here, and instead of 1000, I'm going to do 700. And we'll make sure this is locked so that the proportions stay the same. So then we'll make this smaller as well. And then turn on auto layout so that hugs. And I'm just going to do the same exact thing for all of these. Okay, now we can just bring this right in. Awesome, I think that looks great. Then put in these milestones as well. So make this 96. Just kind of scooch some things around, really. So we can make this text a little bit smaller, and we can make this photo a good bit smaller too. So maybe what we want to do is actually change this orientation a little bit. So we want these to fill the container so that when we expand and contract it, it will actually kind of follow our cues. And then just gonna make this about that wide. There we go. I like that. Just making sure everything perfectly aligns there. I think that looks good. Now this newsletter section will be super easy too. Just gonna kind of squish it together, and then we can resize everything. So we'll do like 64 pixels for here, and we can make it take up a lot of that room. And then I'm just gonna align these to, let's say, I could probably make this a little smaller, and align these each to be 3 columns. Okay, now just do the same thing with the footer, and that means we gotta make this background that dark blue as well. So just make that dark blue. And then we'll just have these here and this on the very bottom. And then you can go ahead and do the same exact thing for mobile. And I'll show you the one thing that I would do a bit differently on mobile for this design. Okay, so I've got all of this designed. Now I just want to show you what I would do differently here. So I'm just going to copy these elements in, and I'm just going to paste them right under here. And this is kind of exactly what I would do. I would stack these. So what I'm going to do is actually make this a little bit wider here. And then we're going to need to make these smaller. So we'll do 18 pixels. And this list group needs to switch to fill container. That way it will just stop at the edge of this here. So you would just do the same exact thing that we did over here on desktop, except instead of using the on hover, you would use on click. So I'll do one quick example, but we don't need to really do the whole thing. So we would take this section and make it a component. And then just like we did before, give it 5 different variants for each of these, and then do the same exact process using on click or on tap because you're using a mobile device. Congratulations on making it through this entire 3-hour compilation. If you've been designing along with me, it's probably taken you a whole lot more than 3 hours, and I really hope you've come out a lot more confident in your skills in Figma than when you started. Your next steps would be to just keep practicing on your own projects and maybe check out our course, Figma for Web Designers, linked in the description box below. Feel free to drop a comment if you found this crash course useful, and we'll see you back on this channel really soon with more Figma and web design content. Bye.